So you would have made a great pastor or preacher if you'd been a boy. That was a quote from my father. I grew up in a fairly conservative area in West Texas, and I remember hearing my father say that, and instead of it being a deterrent to me, I dug in my heels and said, well, I think I can do this. And so I was very fortunate. I made a decision, which, to be honest, the whole journey is kind of like out of whack with what my family wanted me to do. I come from the oil fields of West Texas. My brothers married their high school sweethearts. I took off and came to California. And that was terrible. And when I told my dad the address of the university I went to in Fullerton, it's on Nutwood. So you can imagine a father from Texas, and he's sending his daughter to California to a school on Nutwood Avenue. But I was very fortunate because there were men at that university, even though my denomination, once you get out of California, is extremely conservative, they sat me down and said, you can do anything you set your mind to. And I believed it. And yet, when I decided to go to Mexico, a lot of people said to me, they said, we think you're doing the safe thing. Because at that time, back in the mid-'70s and even before, women felt like if they were going to be in the ministry, they needed to go on the mission field. Because there weren't a lot of churches that were hiring women, even denominational churches. It wasn't just mine. And so I said, no, actually, this is where I feel like I'm called. Ever since I've been a little girl, I've had this incredible commitment to justice. And if you read my book, there's some more stories of where I always stood up for the marginalized and the poor. And it's an honor to be able to do that. But I remember when I did take a youth ministry job right after I lived in Tijuana and I came out, and I needed to have more of a job than just working with the orphanage. I was offered a job to work with the youth at the church. And the man before me, a naval officer that had retired, he was the youth minister working, didn't have any formal training. But when I became working with the youth, I was called youth director because they didn't want to call me a youth minister. And I remember a time that I shared this morning earlier that kind of came to my mind last night is I remember getting a request to come and speak, just like at a church here. And Scott went with me, my husband, that we started the ministry together, and we walked in, and they walked up to him and asked him what he was preaching on. And anybody who knows Scott knows that he will speak, but he doesn't speak often. So he nearly fainted, and he said, what am I going to do? And I said, oh, we'll just run the slideshow, and I'll get up and give a devotion. And then lo and behold, the pastor at the church got up and gave a sermon after I did to kind of probably nix mine. But you know, it's interesting because if you've seen the movie Fried Green Tomatoes, I love that part where Kathy Baker rams her car into the back of those girls' car. But I've done this for 36 years. And so she says in the movie, I'm older and I have more insurance. I've decided at 36 years in the ministry, I've earned the clout to say what I want to say and how I want to say it. So I will admit to you, Roche, after you left, I did swear. I waited till you left, though, just so you know. My thing has always been, I don't really smoke. I don't smoke, and I don't really drink, but I get to swear. So I always tell Scott, I get to swear. That's my thing. But I have decided that I've earned the clout to be able to do that because I've given 36 years. And I find that people actually do let you get away with a little bit more. I decided to go see Pentatonics, and I didn't realize we were going to be standing, and I took my kids, and I made my way to the front stage. And my kids were like, when you can't do that, and I said, just see if they're going to tell a 60-year-old she can't walk up to the stage. So kind of using that clout. And that's the story I want us to talk about today. If you'll put the Proverbs passage up there that I gave you. One of the ways that women received clout in the Old Testament times was by if they could get land. And so in Proverbs 31:16 it says, she considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands she plants a vineyard. And we are sitting here today as a testimony of the amazing women who crashed through that glass ceiling in those times to be able to stand up and make a difference in that New Testament world that Jesus existed in. It was women, a lot of women. And then we've written it to where it looks like it's all men, but that's just not true. That's not accurate. And there's an obscure little story that's recorded in the Old Testament, in Joshua 15:16 through 19, about a woman by the name of Aska. And she was the daughter of Caleb, who was a respected leader in the Jewish community at that time. And I don't know if you grew up in the church, but I did. And we had this little song that we used to sing. 12 men went to spy on Canaan, 10 were bad, and 2 were good. Caleb was one of those spies that was sent by Moses into the promised land to find out what was going on. And this young woman was his daughter. And so like the times, what they would do is they would form alliances, more about family alliances and bringing wealth together and property together versus, I really love this guy. But when she married Othniel, he ended up becoming the first judge in the Israelite community. And so do you see a thread here? The credibility that women had, and even still to this day, sometimes we only have credibility through that male lineage. And we see that in the world in which we are living today, and women needing to crash through these glass ceilings of every aspect of life. Bill and Melinda Gates, who are heroes of mine, and they work with Global Citizen. One of the things that they have had a profound effect is, number one, getting health care to women all over the world, getting education to women all over the world. But this is what they're saying, and it's proven over and over again. Though if women were paid equally to men throughout the world, we would have minimal poverty. Minimal poverty. And what I love about this character, this obscure story of Aska, is that she decided to go to her husband through the right way because she wanted a piece of property. So she went to her husband, who is this judge, and says, I want you to go to my dad so that I can get property. And so what happens is that her dad, Caleb, gives her husband Othniel some property for her. But she's unhappy because the property isn't any good. He gave her a dry parcel of land that wasn't even workable. And so what she does is what is told in this story, and I love it. The passage says this: she was not impressed. She got on her donkey and galloped, I think, probably to her father and asked herself for land with spring water. Caleb agreed. So like the woman in Proverbs, she received a piece of land, a workable piece of land, and that gave her clout because she was willing to step in and make that happen. There were some doors open for me, but for the most part, I had to crash through them. Anybody that knows, I'm a bull in a china closet. And it takes that oftentimes to not only have the courage to start an organization like Amore, but to have done it for 36 years. The average ministry organization, nonprofit, they can be 18 months to 3 years. It's rare, rare. And don't say that lightly, because a light bulb went off in my head one day and realized this is pretty remarkable that not only have Scott and I stayed married, and we started Amore before we got married. Every parent's dream come true is that you say you're going to not go in to be a doctor, but especially parents who don't go to church at all. And Scott told his parents, I don't want to go into medicine, and I'm going into the ministry with my girlfriend. That did not go over well either. And so what it leads us to is back to Mexico. So something that you don't know maybe about us is that every year we sit down, and as we plan out our budget and our projects, we make a strategy to go to the leaders of the communities we serve in. And the ones that you have served in, I don't think you've ever gone to Rosarito. Have you gone to Rosarito? Okay. So you've been in all 3 of our Baja communities, Rosarito, Tecate, and Tijuana. And so we go to the leaders of those communities who do open their doors to us, and we ask them for resources. Whether it's Rosarito, they gave us at the Camp Baños, which would have, for the time period that we build there, we build a short time period. We're building there right now. From Memorial Weekend through the month of June, we build in Rosarito. And we ask them to give us the baños. And that's about a $5,000 gift for us to rent those for the groups that come. Then we go to Tijuana and we ask that city, which is hard because it's a bureaucracy and it's very difficult. But because people know us and because of how we act at the border and how we follow the rules put on us, whether we like them or not, whether we agree with them or not. We don't bribe people. We don't go against what they've asked us to, and we honor them even when we have a group that's really mad and is screaming at Aduana as they are crossing the border, and wonderful, the Aduana people come and say, "We know it's not you." So in Tecate, I'm told this story several years ago that our strategy with Tecate, we build 60 homes there each year. We mostly build in the spring. And they said, we're going to go and we've got to meet with this lady named Merida, and she's a city council person. And she's grown up in this community, and she's risen to be this community government leader, elected government leader. And that's happening in Mexico a lot. A lot of people, especially women in our communities, are growing up and they're running for office. And it's people that we've kind of seen and know, but we really didn't know her. And so my staff says, we've got to go meet with this lady named Merida, and she is going to be the one that will determine whether we get the sand and gravel for the 60 homes. Tecate, if you know that, it's a small community. And so she said to our staff, I don't really have the resource to do this. It's quite a bit. $12,000 to $15,000 for a community like that is just a significant amount of money. I don't know how we're going to be able to do this. I just don't see us doing it. But she said, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. Because I grew up in this community and I've seen what you've done over the years, I want to be able to at least consider it and see if there's something we can do. And I'll tell you in 2 weeks. And so the staff came back and said, we're going to go back in 2 weeks. And so they went and they came back to the office. We'd been praying about it. And I would have given it, to be honest, I say a 50-50 chance. I'd probably give it more like, this is probably not going to happen. But we just kept saying, you know what? We ask, and that's what we need to do. And even though somebody may want to give us something because they see the work that we do, they may not be able to. So they came back to the office, all the team members that were working on this project, and they had this really sad face. Their countenance was like hanging. And I said, well, okay, so we didn't get it. And they started laughing, and they said, no, she gave it to us. And this is what they said, but that's not the story. While we were in her office, she took out a picture of her when she was 10 years old. And she showed it, and she said, I've grown up in this community, and I've watched you come faithfully over the last 30 years. And this picture is me in front of the house that you built that I grew up in. This is the house I grew up in. I don't know how we're going to get the money for you, but we're going to get it because as we talked amongst ourselves, the government leader said, this has been the only organization that has come and done everything they promised. They have respected our laws, and they have stayed faithful. But what I want you to hear more than anything is what we say a lot, it's not about Amor, and it's not about you. And as it relates to who the gift of the house is from. But what I will tell you is you are the hero of this story. Because as great as an organization as Amor is, and I'm proud to be a part of it, and I get credit for doing a lot of things that I did not do. My staff deserves a lot of credit. We facilitate your trip. But she knew of us because of you. Because you come down with your students and your adult leaders, and you have been faithful to us all these years. That is why you're the only church that I can call to our website to look at the houses that were built in the original days because you built them. And if you walk into our More Experience at the office, we have a replica of that first house that you built. You're the heroes of this Tecate story. Please remember that. We just make it happen. If you didn't come, what would we do? We're able to do what we do, 18,500 homes, because you're the hero. And I can't say better words to you than that. And so we don't have this real plan. I love the song this morning that was just sung about the Holy Spirit moving. People always ask us what our strategy is. We don't really have much of one. We just kind of weird things happen, and then that's where we're supposed to go. Scott felt he should go to Cancun, didn't know why. Went to Cancun, got on the plane, said, never coming back to this place, it's horrible. Now we have 12 acres in Puerto Morelos, just off the ocean, that we're going to be building a school of sustainability called EcoCun. So craziness. Scott comes home and says, I've seen this show on television, and it's the Prime Minister of Albania, and he is painting houses, and I'd like us to do that on the Apache reservation where we were working at the time. I said, okay, sure. I know Scott. If he says it, it's going to happen. That's how we got to Juarez. That's how we got to Cancun. And so, but Albania, to be honest with you, I didn't even really know where it was at. I didn't know it was so close to Italy. I think I thought it was, I don't know. I'm not a geography person. So I'm thinking, okay, Scott. So he says, well, I'm going to Washington, D.C. for the presidential prayer breakfast, okay? He says, he calls me and says, I'm going into the Albanian embassy. He said, they told me they'd give me 10 minutes. An hour and a half later, Scott Congdon comes out after meeting with the ambassador to the United States from Albania. And then he comes back and says, I know we're supposed to be in Albania. We go on our sabbatical last fall. We go to a restaurant. A young man who sounds to me Australian was Albanian. I said, well, this Albanian thing keeps coming up. We go to a conference, Urban Youth Ministry Summit of people from all over Europe. We are assigned one night to have dinner with a couple so we can get to know somebody at the conference. It just happens they have the largest church in Albania. We have just designed a home for gypsy refugees in Albania, and we're waiting for this prime minister, who is this pastor's best friend, to give clearance for the people to own the land. Because we don't go anywhere unless the people can own the land. With the two gypsy encampments in Albania, in the capital, because of an outreach in this church, but because of these crazy people who are getting ready to write a book called The Whimsical Servants. Because whimsical is actually a very intentional word, and it's not flaky like a lot of people think. It's an intentional plan of movement. It's Paul wanting to go to Tarsus, but he ends up going to Macedonia. That's us. So no, it doesn't make sense. More doesn't make sense. We, by all intents and purposes, should have collapsed in 2009. I can't really tell you how it stayed completely together. There are some things we're going to be writing about in the book. But I want to leave you with a story that I told here, I think 2009 was the last time I was here, because I remember Jordan was having fall camp. But when I wrote the first one, my publisher said, we don't want you to tell every story in your book because we want you to be able to tell a story when you go out and speak. And this is my most recent favorite story, which is a group comes every year from Ohio, and I got a call from the youth minister, and he says, I just want you to know there's a couple coming on the trip, and here's their story. They have 3 boys that have come on the Mexico trip their whole high school years, and they're down to their last son, and he is going to graduate from high school, and so they think this will be their last trip. That's what we thought. Then that son was killed in a car wreck. And so nobody wanted to ask this mom and dad if they wanted to come on the trip because they were afraid they're grieving. And so they were so surprised when the parents signed up to come on the trip. And he goes and he says, what made you decide to come this year? And the parents said, our sons love Mexico. They love this trip. What better way to honor his memory than to go and serve and build a house? This group built 10 houses that week. And they were assigned to a house to a mom who was living in her car, and she had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and she was actually kind of administering the chemotherapy to herself that they'd gotten in a little clinic. And so she's living in this car with her 4 children. Think about what that's like. You had a guy here one time that was on our board, Larry Ellen, and the reason that he started coming on Mexico trips is he was at work and he heard some of his colleagues talk about what had happened on that trip and how transformational it was, and he wanted to go. And so that's what happens. And so this lady is sitting there and she's watching what's going on. Think about it. You don't have a home, you live in a car, you have 4 kids, and you have terminal cancer, and you have no resources. It's not like when she runs out of money, she can just go to the bank or ATM and get something. She has nothing. And she's watching this house go up that's going to keep her family together no matter what happens to her. And so what happens is, at the end of the week, she wants to talk to this mom and dad because she had heard their story. And what I'm told by the people in the group is that she grabbed their hands and she looked into their eyes and she said this: I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. What I do know is that they've told me I have terminal cancer, so I don't know how long I have to live. But I can live dying knowing that my children have a roof over their head and they have a place to live, to stay together as a family. She said, because I have nothing to give you, the only thing I can think of is this: you came here on this trip and you took care of my kids. So when I get to heaven, I'm going to take care of your boy. 10 houses. They could have built any house, but they built that house. They built that house so they could have that conversation with that mom. That's what we've done for 36 years. And you're just as much the hero of her story as you are of the ones that you live out when you come and build alongside a family in need. And my prayer is by 2020, we will have built 20,000 homes on our 40th anniversary and kept thousands of people together so they can maybe grow up like Merida or Denise, who's a doctor, or the young man that Amy ran into at Home Depot in Tijuana a year ago that came running up and said, I live in one of your homes. Will you pray with me? Lord, you are good and your mercy endures forever. Help us to be mindful on a day where we wake up another time that people have been slaughtered in our own country who don't feel that you are good and your mercy endures forever. Help us to make you known instead of being concerned about making something else great, whether it's religion or whether it's ethnicity. Help us to understand that we can make you known and you make all things great. All those things become great under your countenance. We pray for those who are persecuted for religious reasons. We pray for those who are persecuted for their ethnicity or their sexuality. And when we make you known, everybody's included. Help us to be mindful of that so that we can truly say, with hands holding each other, Lord, you are good and your mercy endures forever, even in the midst of hurt and pain. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.